Welcome to the deep dive. Have you ever found yourself completely lost in a game? So absorbed that hours just melt away without you even noticing.
Oh, definitely. It happens.
And then you think, if we could bottle that incredible magic, that deep engagement, that focused attention, how could we use it? How could we make learning just as captivating, especially for, curious young minds in elementary school?
Right, that's the big question.
Well, today we're taking a shortcut, a deep dive, really, into understanding the cutting edge of game-based learning, maybe uncovering some of its deepest secrets. Our mission today is, well, it's custom-tailored for you, especially if you're maybe an elementary educator, perhaps looking at game-based learning with fresh eyes.
Yeah, maybe you're eager to unlock its incredible potential in your own classroom.
Exactly. We'll be unpacking some truly fascinating source material that goes, well, way beyond just the surface fun of games.
We're talking about the subtle stuff.
Yeah, the subtle yet profoundly powerful design elements that truly enhance learning.
That's absolutely right. And while there's, a lot of established research out there in game-based learning, our sources today highlight three key factors. Factors that are getting more and more attention as researchers and designers really explore the frontier of how games impact our brains.
Okay, what are they?
Well, these are critical, often overlooked elements. How games make us feel,
Right.
what we hear, and the very actions we take within them. We call these emotional design, musical score, and game mechanics.
Emotional design, musical score, game mechanic.
Got it.
So our goal today is to explore these less talked about, but it sounds like incredibly impactful aspects of game design.
Right. And translate them into actionable insights, things you can actually use if you're interested in teaching through play.
We're going to show you how seemingly small design choices can have a surprisingly big effect on a child's learning journey, how they can transform a simple game, maybe, into a powerful educational tool. Emotional design, crafting the learning vibe. Okay, let's unpack this first one. Emotional design. It sounds intriguing. When we play games, it's inherently an emotional experience, isn't it?
It really is. You can't separate the two.
Yeah, think about it. The thrill when you finally beat a challenging level, or maybe that momentary frustration when you have a setback, or just the pure joy of discovering a hidden secret in the game world.
Those are all potent emotions.
But emotional design, as you're describing it, isn't just about that fun or those kind of accidental emotions that pop up.
No, not at all.
It sounds like it's about intentionally using every element of a game, the characters, the environment, the sounds, to evoke specific emotions that actively enhance learning outcomes.
Precisely. It's not a happy accident, it's a deliberate, strategic approach. You can think of it as using, a wide range of design features with the explicit goal of impacting learners' emotions in ways that specifically boost their learning.
So you're designing for the feeling.
Exactly. Experts in the field, like Plass and Kaplan, they define this as being deliberate. For instance, a game might be designed very carefully to evoke a sense of intense curiosity, or maybe a comfortable feeling of mastery as you progress, or even a healthy sense of challenge, all in service of making the learning stick. These emotional states, they aren't just a side effect of playing, they actually become a critical pathway to deeper cognitive engagement and ultimately more effective knowledge acquisition.
It sounds a bit abstract, though, this idea of designing media to induce specific emotions. I know designers have used this in, say, product design or marketing for a long time.
Well, absolutely. It's a well-established principle there.
But for our elementary learners, why is this so profoundly important? How do emotions, beyond just making a child feel good, actually help them learn in a, tangible way?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is the wealth of well-established research, solid scientific evidence showing a direct causal link between our emotional states and our cognitive processes.
Or thinking processes.
Exactly. How our brains think, pay attention, perceive the world around us, and even how we form memories. Studies spanning decades from pioneering work by researchers like Eisen and Izard consistently illustrate this connection.
So it's not just a feeling, it actually changes how the brain works.
In a way, yes. When a learner is in a positive emotional state, feeling happy, curious, safe, various cognitive processes are literally enhanced. Imagine a child feeling genuinely excited and confident about a new topic in your classroom.
Okay.
Their brain is demonstrably more receptive, more open to taking in new information. They're far more likely to pay focused attention, to process what they see and hear deeply, and ultimately to remember it better. This isn't just a hopeful theory. It's really rooted in the fundamental way our brains function. Positive emotions prime us for learning.
So emotions aren't just a byproduct of learning, like a side effect. They're actively influencing how well we learn. They're not just feelings, but a powerful lever for cognition, for the very act of thinking and understanding.
Exactly, you've hit it right there. And to dive a little deeper, several key theories help us understand this connection more clearly. First, there's something called the control value theory of achievement emotion.
Control value theory.
Okay. This theory, by Pekran, describes the origins, the antecedents, and the effects of the emotions learners experience specifically in academic settings. It helps us understand what triggers emotions like enjoyment, pride, maybe anxiety, or even boredom during learning.
Right. Those are all common in classrooms.
And then, crucially, it shows how those emotions impact learning behaviors and outcomes. For instance, if a child feels a strong sense of control over a task, meaning they believe they can succeed if they put in the effort.
Yeah, like I can do this.
Exactly. Or if they genuinely value the learning outcome, they see the point, it matters to them. They're much more likely to experience positive emotions, like enjoyment or pride.
Makes sense.
And those emotions, in turn, fuel their motivation to engage deeper, to persist with the learning material even when it gets tough. This is absolutely crucial for sustained engagement in any learning activity, but especially when it's delivered through a game.
So for an elementary student, maybe tackling a math game, feeling in control of the numbers, like they can figure it out, rather than feeling overwhelmed, is key to fostering that positive emotional state that helps them learn.
Precisely. That feeling of control combats anxiety and promotes enjoyment. Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture of digital learning, there's another important theory. The integrated cognitive affective theory of learning, or ICAM for short.
ICAM.
ICAM provides a solid theoretical foundation for how emotion affects learning, specifically with digital media, like educational games. This theory posits that emotions are truly central to information processing.
Central, not just peripheral.
Central. They don't just happen alongside learning, they actively help learners select what information to focus on, organize it meaningfully in their minds, and integrate it with their existing knowledge.
So they help filter and sort information.
You could say that. It suggests a reciprocal relationship, a two-way street where emotions, cognition, and learning are inherently connected. When a game makes a child feel curious or confident or even pleasantly challenged, it's not just about their mood in that moment. It's directly impacting their mental models for learning and their ability to process information more effectively. Imagine a science simulation where a child's excitement about discovering a new chemical reaction actually helps them select and remember the relevant data points more efficiently.
Because they're emotionally invested.
Exactly. And building further on that, there's the integrative model of emotional foundations of game-based learning, or EMO-GBL.
EMO-GBL. Okay, another one.
Right. This model describes the specific mechanisms for how learning processes and emotion interact to achieve particular learning outcomes within games. It gets really specific to the game context.
How so?
Well, it considers both the immediate triggers of emotion, like how a child appraises a specific situation within the game, thinking, this challenge is difficult, but I think I can do it.
That internal self-talk.
Yes. And it also considers broader influences like their overall achievement goals, what they hope to accomplish. But for our deep dive today, we're really focusing on how specific game elements, the things designers actually build, are designed to evoke emotions that then improve learning.
Gotcha. So moving from the theory to the practical design choices.
Precisely. This is where the practical application really comes into play for game designers and, by extension, for you as an educator thinking about using games.
Yeah.
It pushes us beyond simply asking, is the game fun? Which is important, of course, to asking, is the game deliberately designed to evoke emotions like curiosity or persistence or collaboration that will specifically enhance the learning of this particular concept for my students? It's a much deeper question.
So if we pull all these profound theoretical insights together, control value, ICLM, EMO-GBL, what does this actually mean for someone in an elementary classroom? How can we apply these practically to create better learning experiences, game or no game?
It means that creating a positive emotional environment for learning, whether you're using a sophisticated digital game or running a traditional classroom activity, is absolutely paramount. It's foundational.
Okay.
If a child feels safe, curious, engaged, and even joyful, their brain is literally more open to taking in and remembering information. It's physiologically more receptive.
That's powerful.
Think about how you already do this, perhaps instinctively. Celebrating small wins in your classroom, mastering a new sight word, successfully completing a group project that directly taps into this idea. Positive emotional states enhancing learning.
Right, acknowledging effort and success.
Or consider framing a challenging math problem not as a daunting task, but as an exciting adventure or a puzzle to be solved collaboratively. That simple reframing can immediately shift a child's emotional state from apprehension or anxiety to eager curiosity.
Changing the emotional flavor of the task.
Exactly. The subtle shift in approach, whether you're using a digital game or guiding a traditional classroom activity, is a direct application of emotional design principles. It's about making learning an emotionally rewarding and positive experience, which then lays the groundwork for deeper cognitive engagement and better retention of information. It makes the soil fertile for learning to grow. See game elements as emotional levers.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and, well, tangible for design. Our sources tell us game characters are incredibly powerful influencers of emotional states.
Hugely powerful.
And this isn't just the player's own avatar, the character they control, right? It's also the non-player characters, the NPCs.
Absolutely. Those friendly guides, the wise mentors, maybe even quirky helpers or villains within the game. Children and adults, too, instantly connect with characters in stories, books, movies.
True.
Games leverage this innate human connection, but ideally with a deliberate emotional intent baked into the character design. And studies have extensively investigated how manipulating the static features of characters, basically, how they look, impacts emotion, things you notice right away.
Like their shape or color.
Exactly. For instance, research consistently shows that game characters with round shapes and warm colors, think reds, oranges, yellows, tend to lead to higher positive emotion induction. And significantly, this often correlates with better learning outcomes.
Wow. So round and warm equals more positive feelings and better learning. Why is that?
Well, it's likely tapping into subconscious emotional cues. Roundness often conveys softness, safety, approachability. Think of a cuddly teddy bear versus something sharp and angular. And warm colors are almost universally associated with comfort, happiness, energy. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about emotional signaling.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Imagine for a moment designing a simple game for kindergartners who are just learning their ABCs.
Perfect example.
If the character guiding them through, say, an alphabet maze, is a friendly, bubbly, round little creature, maybe wearing a bright yellow shirt, how might that compare emotionally to a character that's, I don't know, spiky, angular, and dark-colored?
The difference is huge, isn't it? The round, warm character immediately signals safety and approachability. It feels like a friend.
Right.
This makes the child feel more comfortable, more receptive to the learning task. They view the guide as a trusted companion, not a potentially intimidating figure, which is incredibly important for very young learners, especially when building their confidence in a new skill. There's also some interesting research emerging on dimensionality, 2D versus 3D.
Okay.
One study found that participants experienced higher emotional arousal. They were more physiologically engaged with 3D characters compared to flatter 2D characters.
Higher arousal with 3D. Does that mean better learning?
Well, the direct link of that specific finding to learning outcomes is still being explored. It's a bit preliminary. But the increased emotional arousal strongly suggests a deeper level of engagement with the character. And higher engagement usually means the learner is more invested, more attentive.
So maybe if you're using a game about exploring different animal habitats for, say, second graders,
Yeah.
imagining a realistic three-dimensional tiger, even a friendly one with a gentle expression, might evoke more wonder or a stronger sense of immersion, of actually being there, compared to a flat, cartoonish drawing of a tiger.
That makes intuitive sense.
And that heightened emotional engagement, that feeling of being there with a more lifelike character, could potentially make the whole experience more memorable. Maybe the facts about the habitat stick more effectively because the character felt more real.
Exactly. The vividness of a 3D character can make the learning feel more tangible, drawing the child deeper into the virtual world and its lessons. It enhances that sense of presence. But it's not just how characters look. Beyond static features, how they act, their dynamic features is equally vital, maybe even more so.
How they move and express themselves.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Facial expressions, for example, are universal conveyors of emotional states. We're hardwired to read faces. And studies show that happy or sad expressions on game characters are far more emotionally inducing. They grab our attention more than neutral ones.
Just like in real life.
Just like in real life.
Yeah.
Think about how quickly children learn to read emotions from faces. Game characters can tap into that same skill. Body posture also plays a significant role, conveying emotion intensity and context. A slumped posture versus an upright one tells a different story. Even the manner of movement. Research suggests that things like spreading and rising movements can signal anger or excitement, while enclosing and descending movements might suggest sadness or withdrawal. These subtle animations can frame players' emotional expectations and provide crucial nonverbal cues that enhance the emotional narrative of the game.
This has huge implications for designing games that teach social emotional skills, doesn't it?
Absolutely massive. Imagine a game where a character, when losing a round, visibly slumps their shoulders, has a sad facial expression, and maybe moves more slowly for a moment.
Okay.
That provides a clear, immediate visual cue for children to understand empathy, to recognize emotions like disappointment in others. It's learning through observation and connection.
Or, say, in a game about collaboration for older elementary kids, maybe a character that makes open, inviting gestures and movements when suggesting teamwork could effectively encourage cooperation among players.
Exactly. These subtle, nonverbal cues in game characters can teach emotional literacy in a deeply engaging way that simply telling a child about emotions might not achieve. It's an active visual learning experience that can resonate profoundly. Okay, so we have characters. But beyond characters, the virtual spaces themselves, the game environments, are also powerful emotional tools.
The backgrounds, the places where the game happens.
Yes, exactly. These environments are the settings where all the game characters and events take place. They essentially set the stage and influence the mood for the entire learning experience. They're not just passive backdrops. And researchers have meticulously manipulated features within these virtual environments, things like shape, scenery, and lighting, to deliberately elicit different emotions.
They tested this.
Oh, yes. For example, one study found significant differences in feelings of sadness, anxiety, and happiness among participants based purely on these environmental manipulations. Changing the look and feel of the space changed how people felt.
So the environment is actively shaping the player's emotional state.
Directly.
Yeah.
Which, as we've discussed, impacts their receptiveness to learning within that environment. Take the architecture of the play space, or its shape and geometry. It matters. Studies have shown that things like space geometry wide open versus narrow and even ceiling height can influence information processing and emotions.
Ceiling height.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. A very high ceiling might evoke a sense of freedom, grandeur, awe, maybe even vulnerability, while a low, narrow space could feel confining, intimate, intense, or perhaps cozy, depending on other factors. These design choices are rarely accidental in good game design.
Okay, let's try another classroom example.
Yep.
Imagine a game where students explore different historical buildings for a social studies lesson.
Perfect.
A grand open cathedral with towering ceilings, maybe with light streaming through virtual stained glass. That might evoke a sense of awe or reverence, right?
Absolutely. Fitting for learning about its historical significance, its scale.
Conversely, exploring a narrow, winding alley in a virtual medieval town, perhaps with low, enclosed spaces and shadowed corners, could feel mysterious or even a little unsettling.
Which could create an appropriate sense of tension or curiosity for maybe a puzzle-solving quest within that historical context. The environment itself becomes a teaching tool, subtly guiding emotions to enhance the narrative and the historical understanding. Similarly, scenery plays an incredibly important role, what's actually in the environment. Research indicates that natural environments like a virtual forest, a tranquil lake scene, are shown to facilitate higher levels of positive emotions and lower stress compared to urban environments.
The biophilia hypothesis in action, maybe.
Yeah.
Our innate connection to nature.
Could be related. It certainly highlights the calming, engaging, and potentially restorative power of nature, even when experienced in a digital form.
This is so intuitive. If you have a science game teaching about ecosystems, having children explore a lush, vibrant virtual rainforest, rich with detailed plant life, maybe animal sounds when they're learning about biodiversity, versus exploring a bleak, concrete cityscape when discussing pollution.
The contrast is powerful.
Right. It could powerfully convey the content's emotional weight. The scenery wouldn't just reinforce the scientific concepts, it would evoke a stronger emotional response. Wonder and appreciation for nature in one case, maybe concern and awareness for environmental issues in the other. It makes the lesson far more impactful and memorable.
And don't forget lighting. Lighting in environments also significantly influences emotional states. Studies have shown that higher luminescence or brightness can increase physiological arousal, makes you more alert.
Yeah?
Furthermore, research indicates that warm, sort of reddish, bright light and cool, maybe bluish, dim light can induce positive moods, though the effects can be complex. Early research often studied lighting combined with other elements, but the principle holds. Light, color, and intensity are powerful, often subconscious, emotional triggers. They set the mood.
So thinking about elementary kids again, maybe in a game about community helpers. A brightly lit, welcoming fire station, perhaps with warm, inviting light simulated inside, might make children feel secure, curious, eager to learn about fire safety.
Creates a safe, positive space.
On the other hand, a dimly lit, mysterious cave in an adventure game, perhaps with flickering torchlight casting shadows, could create an appropriate sense of tension or anticipation for a puzzle-solving challenge.
Exactly. These deliberate lighting choices aren't just for aesthetics. They shape the emotional backdrop. They prepare the child's mind for the specific learning task or narrative beat, making the experience more immersive and ultimately more effective. Now, while the importance of emotions is clear, and it's well established in fields like product design and marketing, it's important to note that research specifically linking these methods of inducing emotions in games to measurable learning outcomes for young children is still relatively preliminary.
So we know emotion matters for learning, but the specifics of how to best design for it in games needs more study.
Precisely. Most existing studies on emotional design in games have focused predominantly on visual aspects, characters, environments. Future research really needs to explore more game elements in detail. Think about audio, musical scores. How do they contribute holistically to emotional design within a learning context?
Right, we haven't talked much about sound yet.
And with the emergence of immersive technologies like virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, there are huge opportunities. New approaches to emotional design that leverage the unique affordances of these media need to be thoroughly investigated.
Using that deeper immersion for emotional impact.
Yes. And ultimately, as a long-term goal for the field, emotional design shouldn't be an afterthought, something tacked on for superficial engagement. It should be integrated as a fundamental, intentional feature in the very architecture of all game-based learning environments. 2. Musical score. The unseen conductor of learning.
Okay, so we've explored how what we see in a game through that lens of emotional design can intentionally shape how we feel and therefore how we learn. That's incredibly powerful stuff.
It really is.
But now let's shift from the visual to the auditory, what we hear. When we talk about a game's musical score, you mentioned it's not just the background music playing passively.
No, it's much broader than that.
Our sources tell us it includes all sounds in music. So the main soundtrack that sets the overall tone.
Right.
Subtle environmental sounds, like maybe rustling leaves in a forest setting, or the distant rumble of city noises.
Atmospheric sounds.
And even specific sound effects that happen in response to player actions, like a satisfying ding for a correct answer, or maybe a gentle thud or a buzz for a wrong one. It's this entire, meticulously crafted auditory landscape.
Precisely. It's the whole sonic environment. And these sounds serve dual crucial purposes. First, they're effective, meaning they induce specific emotions, they build motivation, they set the mood.
Like we discussed with emotional design visuals.
Exactly, but through sound. And second, they are cognitive. They provide essential information, cues, and immediate feedback to players.
Information through sound. How so?
Well, think about those distinct sound cues in a game. When you solve a puzzle correctly, that satisfying chime or maybe a little celebratory fanfare.
Yeah, you know you got it right instantly.
Or when you encounter an obstacle, perhaps there's a sudden, low thrumming sound or a jarring noise. These sounds aren't just decoration. They're integral to the gameplay experience and, crucially, to the learning process. They signal success, danger, or new information, often even before it's fully processed visually. One of the foundational ideas in this area is the arousal and mood hypothesis.
Arousal and mood hypothesis. Okay.
It basically suggests that music directly influences a listener's level of arousal, how alert or stimulated they are, and their overall mood.
Makes sense. Music definitely affects my mood.
Right. And these changes in arousal and mood, the theory goes, directly affect their performance on various cognitive tasks. This includes things like creative problem solving, doing arithmetic, even spatial ability. It highlights that the vibe vibe or feeling evoked by the music can profoundly impact a child's ability to focus, engage, and perform well on intellectual tasks within a game.
That makes perfect sense for visual design, like we just covered. But how does the soundscape of a game play into this specifically? You mentioned tempo earlier.
Yeah.
The speed of the music.
Yes, the tempo of the music, how fast or slow it is argued to be a very, very important factor influencing our affective state, our level of arousal. We instinctively react to fast beats with energy, maybe excitement or tension, and slow ones often correlate with calm or melancholy or focus.
And what about the type of music, like major versus minor keys? Does that matter too?
Absolutely. Beyond tempo, the musical mode, whether a piece is in major or minor keys, primarily affects mood. It's a powerful emotional shorthand.
How so?
Well, major modes are almost universally associated with happiness, brightness, excitement. Think of a triumphant march or a cheerful pop song. Minor modes, on the other hand, are often linked to sadness, dreaminess, thoughtfulness, or sometimes even a sense of gravity or suspense.
So a game designer can use that deliberately.
Very deliberately. They can choose a major key for a moment of triumph or discovery in the game, maybe when a student masters a concept, or they could use a minor key to build suspense before a challenge or to convey a more serious theme in the narrative. It directly influences the player's emotional state without a single word needing to be spoken. It's subtle, yet incredibly powerful emotional guidance through sound. Now, according to experts like Monday, game music serves 3 core functions. The first is the environmental function.
Environmental function, okay.
This means game music enriches the player's perception of the game world itself. It provides non-visual information, like the game's overall theme. Is it adventurous, that's mysterious, that's educational, or its current state? Is it calm, tense? And it can assign meaning to specific objects or environments.
So the music tells you about the place.
In a way, yes. For example, a heroic fanfare might signal entering a new, perhaps safe area where the main learning objective is about to be presented, while discordant sounds or a shift in the music could indicate a hidden danger or a challenging puzzle approaching. It's about creating an all-encompassing atmosphere that subtly communicates vital information beyond just the visual.
Okay, let's try an elementary example again.
Yeah.
Imagine a game teaching about different biomes. Deserts, forests, oceans.
Good one.
The subtle sounds of bustling jungle, maybe faint chirping insects, distant monkey calls, the rustle of unseen creatures, or the calming rhythmic rung of ocean waves hitting a shore. Combined with perhaps some indigenous-sounding music unique to different regions. That could make the environment feel incredibly real and vibrant, couldn't it?
Absolutely. That rich auditory experience helps children immerse themselves in the learning content. It makes a virtual ecosystem feel tangible and alive. It deepens their connection to the material, making the facts about, say, rainforest biodiversity more memorable because they're tied to that evocative soundscape they experienced. The second function is immersion. Music is absolutely crucial for drawing a player deeper into the game world, for creating that feeling of being there.
Making it feel real.
Yes. A player's enjoyment of the music can directly increase or decrease their sense of being in the game, of truly inhabiting that virtual space. If the music jars or feels out of place, it breaks the immersion.
Right, it pulls you out of the experience.
Exactly. Additionally, music that seamlessly complements the narrative of the game strongly encourages deeper immersion. When the music perfectly fits the story, whether it's building tension during a cliffhanger or swelling with celebration after a victory, it pulls you in and makes you feel like an active participant, not just an observer clicking buttons.
Okay, think about a digital storytelling book, or maybe a history adventure game for elementary students.
Yeah.
Music that subtly builds suspense as a character, approaches a mystery, perhaps with a low, growing rumble and an increasing tempo.
Creates anticipation.
Or music that swells with triumph when the historical challenge is overcome, like figuring out a puzzle related to ancient Egypt. That helps children feel truly part of the narrative, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. That emotional resonance, powerfully driven by the music, makes the story and its lessons far more memorable than just reading facts on a static screen. The music becomes the heartbeat of the story, making the learning feel exciting and personal. And finally, there's the diegetic function.
Diegetic, what does that mean?
It basically means music that exists within the story world itself, or music that directly adds meaning to the game's story or gameplay. It often confirms visual information or resolves ambiguities.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Different rhythms and tempos can help players quickly identify safe versus dangerous stages in a game's narrative. It's about the music directly communicating crucial narrative cues or gameplay states, sometimes even more immediately than visuals can.
Okay, this sounds really practical for safety games. Like in a game teaching fire safety to young kids, you could have a distinct, calm, maybe reassuring melody playing whenever the child is in designated safe zones of a virtual house.
Clearly signaling security.
All right, it tells them, you're okay here, you can explore. Conversely, maybe a jarring quick tempo with a sudden percussive sound could instantly signal the danger zone, like getting too close to a virtual stove that requires immediate action, like moving away or clicking on a call for help button.
That's a perfect application. That powerful auditory cue helps young children quickly interpret the situation and apply the learn and safety rules, sometimes even before they fully process the visual information. It's an immediate, intuitive signal that reinforces the lesson in a very direct way.
Now that brings up something I've heard about before, the Mozart effect. You know, the idea that listening to Mozart was supposed to make you smarter. Does that apply here to game music? Can we just play classical music in our learning games and expect better outcomes?
The famous Mozart effect. It's a great question, and our sources actually clarify this quite well. The original Mozart effect, which observed a temporary increase in performance on spatial reasoning tasks after listening to a specific Mozart sonata, is now widely believed to be due to enhanced positive mood and an appropriate level of arousal caused by the music.
So it wasn't Mozart specifically.
Likely not inherently special to Mozart's music itself. Crucially, subsequent studies suggest that preference is the key factor here. Listening to music, or even listening to narrated stories, that a learner prefers strongly enhances their arousal and mood in a positive way, and that leads to increased performance on various tasks.
So it's about liking the music, not the genre.
Exactly. It's not about the specific composer or genre necessarily, but about the positive emotional state the music evokes in that individual learner. If you like the music, you feel better, you're more alert, and you perform better.
This is a huge takeaway for teachers then. It means for a creative activity in the classroom, maybe like free drawing or building something with blocks, or even using a digital art game.
Yes.
Playing familiar, uplifting children's songs that kids genuinely like and recognize could potentially make them more creative and energetic.
That's what the research suggests. For instance, one study with 5-year-old Japanese children showed this very effect: preferred children's music boosted performance on a creative task. So it's not about forcing specific classical music. It's about creating a positive mood and an appropriate level of arousal that matches the task, empowering children to engage fully and enthusiastically. It's about leveraging what they already enjoy. However, there's always a however, isn't there?
Usually. What's the caveat here?
There's a crucial caveat related to this idea of arousal. It comes from the Yerkes-Dodson law.
Yerkes-Dodson. Sounds familiar.
It suggests an inverted U-shaped relationship between arousal and performance. Think of it like a curve that goes up, peaks, and then comes back down.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means there's an optimal level of arousal for any given task. If arousal levels are either too high or too low, performance suffers. Too little arousal, you're bored, disengaged, lack focus. Too much arousal, you're stressed, anxious, overwhelmed, distracted, and can't concentrate.
So you need to find the Goldilocks zone of arousal. Not too hot, not too cold.
Exactly. So applying that to games, for a game that requires focused problem solving, like maybe an elementary math game with multi-step problems.
Right, needs concentration.
You wouldn't want frantic, high arousal music blasting away. That could easily overstimulate and distract the children from the equations. But conversely, you also wouldn't want overly dull or monotonous music that causes disengagement and boredom. Finding that sweet spot music that is engaging enough to maintain focus but not so stimulating that it becomes distracting is absolutely key.
It's about calibrating the auditory input precisely to the cognitive demands of the learning task, making sure the music supports rather than hinders concentration.
Precisely. And just to elaborate briefly on tempo and mode again, up-tempo music, while it can certainly enhance performance sometimes and inject energy, can also act as a stressor if it's too intense or prolonged. Think about how fast, insistent music might make you feel rushed or pressured.
Yeah, like a timer ticking loudly.
Exactly. Conversely, as we said, music in a major mode is widely associated with happiness and lightheartedness, while minor modes are linked to sadness, thoughtfulness, or sometimes a sense of challenge. And interestingly, faster tempos in major modes are consistently found to lead to higher enjoyment, which ties back to that all-important concept of learner preference and positive mood. Now, when we look at research on music's specific effect on performance in games, the findings are actually somewhat mixed. It highlights the complexity of this interaction.
Not straightforward.
Not always. For instance, some studies found that low arousal music actually led to faster lap times in a driving game compared to high arousal music.
Slower music made them drive faster. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but the interpretation was that the very high arousal music might have added too much cognitive load, making it harder to focus on the primary task of driving well.
Okay. The music itself was demanding attention.
Possibly. Yet other research showed that player-selected music, and sometimes even high arousal music, could lead to better performance in driving games. This suggests that the player's personal preference for the music might mediate or change the effects of arousal. If they like the fast music, maybe it helps.
So preference trumps arousal level sometimes.
It might. And in virtual learning environments specifically, studies have found that background music sometimes helped learning, but other times it hindered it. It seemed to depend on factors like the cognitive load of the learning task itself and how familiar the learner was with the technology being used. So there's definitely no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to music in learning games.
This really tells us that context is absolutely everything. For a high-speed, reaction-based game, maybe something teaching quick visual identification or rapid fact recall, appropriate background music might be beneficial, especially if it doesn't add too much cognitive load and is ideally preferred by the child.
Could be motivating, keep the energy up.
But for a game where a child needs to memorize complex facts, solve intricate puzzles, or engage in deep reading comprehension.
Where focus is paramount.
Right. Too much background music or music that's too busy, too emotionally charged, or just not liked by the student could actually distract them significantly and hinder learning. So for those focus-intensive tasks in an elementary learning game, maybe less is more when it comes to background music. Or perhaps silence is golden. Allowing the child's cognitive resources to be fully dedicated to the core learning content seems critical.
That's a very important consideration. And honestly, there is a clear and significant lack of comprehensive research on music specifically in games designed for learning outcomes. Most existing research tends to be on entertainment games, driving simulators, or general cognitive tasks outside a game context.
So we need more studies focused on education.
Desperately. Future studies need to systematically investigate how different music types, considering tempo, mode, genre, instrumentation, maybe even the presence versus absence of music influence learner behavior across different game genres, puzzle, simulation, adventure, and, crucially, different learning goals, skill acquisition, conceptual understanding, problem solving. We need a much better understanding of the specific factors and mechanisms that influence learners' behaviors under various musical conditions. This includes delving deeper into the role of learners' individual music preferences and how those impact their learning behavior, and ensuring future studies include a broader range of demographic attributes for more generalizable findings. This is a truly fertile ground for future exploration if we want to genuinely unlock the full potential of musical scores in educational games. 3. Game mechanics. The engine of engagement and learning.
Okay, so we've covered what we see with emotional design, shaping our feelings, and what we hear with musical scores, guiding our mood and maybe focus, both incredibly important. Now, let's talk about what we actually do in a game.
The actions, yes. Game mechanics.
Game mechanics. At their heart, what are they? Our sources say they're the tools for gameplay, the essential, repeated, moment-to-moment activities players engage in.
That's a good way to put it. They are the experiential building blocks of player interactivity. They literally define the actions, the behaviors, the control mechanisms available within a game. Think of the sling mechanic in Angry Birds. You know, pulling back that slingshot to launch a bird with specific physics. Or maybe the shooter mechanic in a game like All You Can E.T., where you're rapidly tapping to feed hungry aliens falling from the sky.
Right, the core interaction.
These aren't just random actions. They are the fundamental ways players interact with the game world to achieve goals. And according to a well-known framework called MDA mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, game mechanics are the foundational component. They are the engine of the game.
The engine, I like that.
They determine how a game plays, the dynamics that emerge from those rules, and ultimately the aesthetic experiences the feelings, like challenge, discovery, fellowship that the game creates for the player. Mechanics are ground zero.
Okay, so they're the core actions. Now, our sources emphasize that mechanics are critical for learning. Why are they so crucial for making a game truly educational, not just superficially entertaining? What makes them different from just any fun interaction?
Well, they are absolutely fundamental. Experts like Plass and colleagues argue that game mechanics are a crucial game design element. because they allow games to engage learners at multiple intertwined levels simultaneously.
Multiple levels.
Yes. Effective, they evoke emotions, like satisfaction from solving a puzzle. Behavioral, they prompt specific actions, like clicking or dragging. Cognitive, they require thinking, planning, problem solving. And even sociocultural, they can facilitate interactions with other players or characters within the game.
Wow. Okay. They hit all those levels.
And because of that multi-level engagement, they are seen as a determining factor in promoting genuine learning in educational games. Without well-designed mechanics that align with the learning goals, a game might just be, as you said, an interactive textbook or a set of flashcards with some points thrown in. It misses the core power of game-based learning. It's the mechanics that truly transform information into an experience. Now, for designing truly effective educational game mechanics, the sources highlight 2 points as absolutely vital, non-negotiable, really.
Okay, what are they?
First, they must seamlessly incorporate principles from the learning sciences. This ensures the game genuinely supports learning that aligns with established theories and robust research on how people actually acquire knowledge and skills effectively. It's not just about what feels fun. It has to be pedagogically sound.
Grounded in how kids learn.
Exactly. Second, and equally important, the mechanics must be deeply integrated with the learning content. The what you learn and the how you play need to be fused.
Content and mechanics alignment.
Yes. When the content you want to teach and the game mechanics align seamlessly when playing the game is practicing the skill or exploring the concept, learner interest is significantly higher. And learning outcomes are far more likely to be achieved without interrupting the natural flow of the game, without that feeling of, okay, now stop playing, it's time for the learning part.
Avoiding that chocolate-covered broccoli problem you mentioned.
Precisely. If the learning feels like an organic, essential part of the game's core actions, it's vastly more effective and engaging.
Now, this is a really important distinction that our sources make, and I think it's crucial for teachers to grasp. There are game mechanics, and then there are learning mechanics. What exactly is the difference between those two, and why does that distinction matter so much for us as educators thinking about using or designing games?
That's a critical point, and sometimes a source of confusion. Learning mechanics describe the major building blocks of learning activities, which are distinct from purely play activities. They are abstract design patterns of learning interactions.
Abstract patterns, like what?
Think of them as the underlying educational objective expressed as an interaction pattern. For example, a learning mechanic might be students will practice inferencing skills by analyzing clues, or learners will understand cause and effect by manipulating variables, or children will practice addition facts through rapid recall. These are the abstract pedagogical goals you want to achieve through interaction. They aren't directly playable themselves.
Okay, so they're the what we want students to learn or practice framed as an interaction.
Exactly. These abstract learning mechanics then need to be instantiated, brought to life as concrete game mechanics. This means translating that educational goal into a specific, playable, interactive game action.
Making the abstract playable.
Right. So, for example, that learning mechanic of communicating with game characters to collect information could be instantiated as a game mechanic in vastly different ways. In one game, it might be a simple dialogue box where players just click on pre-written text options to advance the story.
Okay, pretty basic.
In another, more complex game, the same learning mechanic might be instantiated by requiring the player to decode parts of an alien language through a series of logic puzzles before they can even unlock the dialogue options to get the information.
Wow, much more involved.
Or perhaps it involves using a specific in-game communication device that requires manual dexterity or strategic timing to operate successfully. The choice of which game mechanic to use for that instantiation depends entirely on your target audience, elementary versus high school, the game genre, puzzle versus adventure, the specific context within the game, and most importantly, the learning goals.
So the same learning goal can look very different in terms of gameplay.
Absolutely. But crucially, the learning mechanic, the educational goal, should always be grounded in learning sciences. This ensures that whatever game mechanic you choose to instantiate it actually serves a sound pedagogical purpose and supports real learning, not just, busy work that feels game-like but doesn't teach anything meaningful.
That really clarifies it. So if my learning mechanic for a first grade math game is students will practice their addition facts.
Okay, common goal.
The game mechanic could be instantiated as matching numbered blocks to a target sum by dragging and dropping them with a mouse. Or it could be collecting floating stars by jumping a character onto platforms labeled with the correct answer to an addition problem. or even launching a virtual rocket by correctly solving the addition sum displayed on its launch pad within a time limit.
Exactly. Multiple game mechanics can serve the same underlying learning mechanic.
The learning objective practicing addition facts directly drives the game action, not the other way around. The gameplay is the learning, ideally.
That's the goal. Seamless integration. D, designing for learning. Strategies and research insights. So building on that, the most important function of game mechanics in truly educational games is to facilitate genuine learning by allowing experiential learning during gameplay.
Learning by doing.
Precisely. Learners shouldn't just passively receive information, like watching a video embedded in the game or reading long blocks of text. They should ideally acquire new knowledge or skills through direct, meaningful, and often hands-on interactions within the game world itself. The game should function as a dynamic sandbox for active discovery, where making choices, experimenting, maybe even failing and trying again, and seeing immediate consequences is an integral part of the learning process. And to guide this design effectively, various learning theories can provide a strong foundation. Theories like situated learning, which emphasizes learning in authentic context, or cognitive apprenticeship, where learners acquire skills through guided practice and observation, can directly inform the design of effective learning mechanics.
So drawing on established educational psychology.
Absolutely. There are also specific models developed for this. For example, the Interact model provides an integrated framework for designing interactivity holistically. It encourages designers to consider the interplay between the medium, the game itself, the learner's characteristics, age, prior knowledge, etc., their motivation, their emotional state, linking back to emotional design, and the mental models they are building as they play.
Think about the whole picture.
Yes, it's about ensuring all these elements work together synergistically to create an effective and truly engaging learning experience, making sure every click, every choice, every action in the game contributes meaningfully to a deeper understanding. Now, how do we ensure that the game mechanics we design actually meet the learning objectives? How do we know if learning is really happening? That's where the evidence-centered design (ECD) framework comes in. It's a very systematic process.
Evidence-centered design. Okay, sounds rigorous.
It is. It involves, first, defining precisely what students should know and be able to do at the end of the learning experience. This is called the student model. What does competency look like?
Got it. Define the target.
Second, it's about designing specific tasks and activities within the game that will allow students to demonstrate that knowledge or skill. This is the task model. How will they show what they know?
Designing the assessment into the game.
Exactly. And third, critically, it's about collecting observable evidence of learning from their performance on those tasks within the game. This is the evidence model. What data does the game capture to show learning is occurring? This systematic approach ensures that the game isn't just fun, but that it actively provides data evidence on whether genuine learning is actually happening, how well, and maybe even where students are struggling.
That sounds incredibly practical for teachers. So going back to our fourth grade fractions example, ECD would ensure the game's mechanics aren't just about, say, moving generic pieces around abstractly. The game would require students to demonstrate their understanding of fractions in a meaningful way.
How might that look?
Maybe by clicking on the correct fractional part of a virtual pie that visually changes as they interact with it. Or perhaps by dividing a set of virtual cookies equally among several game characters, and then maybe having to label the fraction each character received.
Concrete actions linked to the concept?
Right. And the game, following the evidence model, would then record how they approach and solve these problems, not just if they got the final answer right, but maybe their steps, their hesitations, the types of errors they make. This provides concrete evidence of their understanding or misunderstanding, making the learning process and the child's thinking truly visible to the teacher, and maybe even to the student themselves through feedback. Now, we keep coming back to this idea of deeply integrating learning content with the mechanics. It seems absolutely vital. You mentioned it's a potential pitfall to keep them separate.
It is absolutely vital. Experts consistently emphasize that content needs to be integrated seamlessly within the game structure. Some suggest organizing content hierarchically within the game, perhaps mirroring a progression like Bloom's taxonomy, starting with basic recall mechanics and moving towards analysis or creation mechanics as the player advances.
Building complexity.
Others propose that learners should explore the content through gameplay itself, where the learning material is integrated directly within the core interactions, the core mechanics. Again, it's not about adding content to a game, it's about embedding content within the very fabric of the game's mechanics and narrative structure. And here's that crucial study I mentioned earlier that really drives this point home. It serves as a powerful cautionary tale.
Okay, the burger flipping study.
That's the one. Researchers looked at a music video game where participants were frantically flipping burgers on a grill under intense time pressure, a core game mechanic demanding fast reactions.
Okay, sounds like a typical fast-paced game mechanic.
Right. But while they were doing this frantic burger flipping, foreign language vocabulary words were being displayed on the screen, supposedly for incidental learning.
Ah, so the learning content, vocabulary, was separate from the core mechanic, burger flipping.
Exactly. There was also a control group that simply watched the game being played, saw the vocabulary words, but didn't do the burger flipping themselves.
Okay, so who learned more vocabulary?
The shocking result. The group that watched but didn't play had significantly higher incidental vocabulary learning.
Wait, the ones who didn't play learned more.
Yes. And they also reported lower cognitive load than the active players who were juggling the burger flipping and trying to notice the words.
Wow, that is a huge aha moment for elementary teachers thinking about games.
Isn't it? It means if a game mechanic like frantic burger flipping is not directly aligned with the learning content, like vocabulary acquisition, it actually introduces what learning scientists call extraneous cognitive load.
Extraneous cognitive load.
Yeah.
Meaning mental effort wasted on irrelevant stuff.
Precisely. It's mental effort that's required by the game's activity, but doesn't actually contribute to the intended learning itself. And that extraneous load can actively hinder learning rather than helping it, because our cognitive capacity is limited. The brain gets overloaded by the irrelevant task.
So for a game teaching phonics to first graders, the fun part must be the phonics. Like maybe correctly blending sounds together makes the character jump over an obstacle, or identifying specific letter patterns unlocks a treasure chest.
Exactly. The core mechanic has to embody the learning goal.
It absolutely cannot be an unrelated mini-game, like matching colors, that happens alongside the phonics practice but distracts from it. The content must be deeply embedded in the fun mechanics. Otherwise, as that study showed, it might just be a distraction with a side of learning that the child misses entirely because their attention is focused on the more demanding but irrelevant game mechanic.
That study is such a powerful reminder. Integration is key. No. Beyond this critical integration principle, a small but growing body of research also compares the effects of different types of game mechanics on learning outcomes.
Comparing one mechanic versus another for the same learning goal.
Yes. For instance, in a middle school math game designed to teach students about the angle properties of quadrilaterals, researchers designed two versions with different core mechanics.
Correct.
They found that learners performed significantly better on conceptual understanding measures when they used the conceptual rule mechanic. In this version, players had to first explicitly specify which geometric rule they were applying, for example, opposite angles are equal, before calculating the angle.
Making them think about the why.
Exactly. This was compared to the arithmetic mechanic, where players only had to provide the final numeric response, just typing in the angle value.
More focused on the what.
Right. Interestingly, though, the arithmetic condition, just typing the number, generated more immediate situational interest among the players. They found it slightly more engaging moment to moment.
So the deeper learning came from the conceptual mechanic, but the simpler arithmetic mechanic was maybe more immediately satisfying.
That's what it suggests, a potential trade-off between fostering deeper conceptual learning and maximizing immediate surface-level engagement. It highlights the importance for designers and educators to be clear about their primary goal and balance these design considerations.
This is fascinating for elementary students learning geometry. Instead of just asking them to type the number for an angle, the arithmetic approach, a game could require them to first choose which rule applies from a simple list. Maybe icons representing this is a right angle, 90 degrees, or these angles add up to 180 degrees.
Making the concept explicit.
Right. Only then would they input the number. This emphasizes the conceptual understanding, the reasoning, which can lead to deeper, more transferable learning, even if that extra step of choosing the rule feels a little less immediately gratifying than just getting the answer right quickly. It means prioritizing the why over just the what when designing for true understanding.
Another crucial comparison involves exploratory versus direct instruction mechanics, especially in simulations.
Learning by exploring versus being told.
Essentially, yes. In experiments using simulations for learning science concepts, like the ideal gas laws, researchers found that in less complex simulations with fewer variables to manage, an exploratory mechanic was generally more effective. This is where learners use things like sliders to manipulate variables, pressure, volume, temperature, and discover the relationships on their own. They actively constructed their own knowledge.
Makes sense for simpler systems.
However, for more complex simulations with many interacting variables, the results were more nuanced. Learners identified as having lower executive functions, maybe younger kids, or those who struggle with planning, working memory, or self-regulation actually benefited more from direct instruction embedded in the simulation, such as watching short videos of an expert demonstrating how to explore the simulation effectively.
Providing more scaffolding.
Exactly. Conversely, learners with higher executive functions continued to benefit more from the open exploratory mechanics even in the complex simulation. They could handle the cognitive load of exploration.
This vividly highlights the importance of individual learner characteristics. We really need to differentiate our game design choices, don't we?
Absolutely. It's vital for differentiating instruction, even through games. For younger elementary students, or perhaps those who struggle with independent discovery and require more structure, a game that directly demonstrates a concept, maybe through clear animations or step-by-step guided tutorials integrated into the gameplay, might be much more effective. It provides the necessary scaffolding.
Meeting them where they are.
But for older students with more developed problem-solving skills and higher executive functions, giving them the tools to manipulate variables, experiment, and discover principles on their own, like building different bridge structures in a physics game, and testing their stability under different loads could be much more powerful and foster deeper conceptual understanding and scientific reasoning skills. It's about matching the mechanic's cognitive demands to the learner's developmental stage and cognitive strengths, making sure the challenge is just right, not too easy, not frustratingly hard. Another surprisingly impactful mechanic identified in the research is the choice mechanic.
Just giving learners choices.
Even simple ones. One study operationalized this by simply providing learners the option to select their own non-player character, NPC, to act as an instructional guide in a geometry game. They could pick one of several characters to help them.
Okay, a seemingly minor choice.
Seemingly minor, yes. But the results strongly suggested that having this simple choice positively influenced their learning outcomes, their reported motivation, and their actual in-game performance compared to students who were just assigned a guide. Giving learners agency, even a small amount of perceived control, can be incredibly impactful on their engagement and subsequent success.
This is such an easy win for elementary teachers using games, or even designing simple classroom activities.
Totally agree.
Letting children choose their avatar, maybe a color scheme for their game interface, or selecting a specific helper character in a learning game can significantly boost their buy-in and motivation. It taps into that need for autonomy. It's just like letting them choose which book to read during independent reading time or which station to visit during math centers. That sense of ownership makes the learning feel more personal, more engaging, and more relevant. It's a small design choice with potentially a surprisingly big motivational payoff.
And finally, let's touch on those familiar gamification mechanics, things like badges, points, and leaderboards.
Ah, yes, the classics. Do they actually help with learning?
Well, while their overuse or misuse is sometimes debated in academic circles, research, particularly with older students like college learners, has consistently shown they can be effective motivators. For example, they have motivated students to engage in more difficult tasks they might otherwise avoid, and even to produce higher quality work, leading to increased overall participation in learning activities.
How do they work?
They tap into our natural human desires for achievement, visible progress, recognition, status, and sometimes friendly competition. When used thoughtfully, they can provide clear goals, immediate feedback on progress, and a sense of accomplishment.
So even if you're not using a complex digital game in your elementary classroom,
Right.
you can still leverage these principles.
Incorporating a simple classroom point system for completing math problem sets, awarding colorful printed badges or stickers for mastering reading levels, or creating a very carefully managed, maybe focused on effort or improvement, not just raw score, a leaderboard for spelling practice, could potentially boost engagement and effort. Absolutely. It shows how these powerful game design principles can be applied even in traditional learning environments. It proves that the magic of games isn't just confined to digital screens, it's about understanding the underlying psychological principles of what motivates us to engage, persist, and achieve. Future directions for game mechanics research. So despite their clear importance in engaging learners and facilitating active learning, research specifically on game mechanics and their detailed impact on learning outcomes is, perhaps surprisingly, still quite limited compared to other areas of educational technology research.
Really? Even though they seem so central.
Yes, there's a lot more work to be done. Future work really needs to investigate the detailed structure of game mechanics more deeply. For instance, how do satellite mechanics, things like power-ups, bonus levels, mini-challenges, customization options, effectively enhance or interact with the core mechanics, the main interaction loop of the game, to maintain engagement over time and provide appropriate, varied levels of challenge?
How the different parts fit together.
Exactly. We also need much more empirical research on how abstract learning mechanics are best instantiated as concrete game mechanics to maximize educational effectiveness. We need to move beyond just theoretical frameworks and case studies to develop robust, evidence-based design patterns. What specific game actions work best for teaching specific concepts or skills? And crucially, more research is required to directly show how game mechanics that successfully foster effective engagement, making it fun, behavioral engagement, keeping players active, and socio-cultural engagement, encouraging interaction, actually translate into cognitive engagement, that is, deeper thinking, meaningful processing, and durable learning.
Without causing overload.
Without inadvertently introducing that unnecessary cognitive demand, like we saw so vividly in that burger flipping study, we need a far better understanding of how, when, and to what extent the combination of different types of engagement truly promotes or sometimes hinders learning for diverse learners. This includes investigating how different mechanics influence different learners based on their individual characteristics, like their level of executive functions, their prior knowledge in the subject, their learning preferences, even their cultural background. We need to ensure we're designing games that are effective for the actual children who will be playing them, not just some generic average learner. And finally, there are currently no widely established clear design patterns for how to most effectively align academic content with the overarching game structure and the specific mechanics chosen. While experts suggest principles like integrating content hierarchically or embedding it directly within gameplay interactions, the burger flipping study tragically underscored how critical and potentially counterproductive, if done wrong, these design decisions are.
We need more concrete guidance.
Exactly. Future research should therefore focus intently on examining concrete design patterns that demonstrably achieve that seamless integration of academic content with both game structure and mechanics, and then rigorously test the effects of these patterns on actual learning outcomes in real educational settings. This will provide clear, actionable guidance for both game designers creating educational products and, crucially, for educators like yourself who are eager to harness the power of play effectively and responsibly in the classroom. Outro.
So we've taken quite a deep dive today into the fascinating and, as you've highlighted, still emerging world of emotional design, musical scores, and game mechanics in game-based learning.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. And the key takeaway seems to be that these aren't just technical details for game developers to worry about. They are fundamental psychological elements that deeply shape how a game impacts a learner. They profoundly influence their engagement, their motivation, and ultimately their capacity to learn effectively.
That's right. And while, as we noted, comprehensive research on their specific effects within learning games is still growing and evolving, the compelling evidence from other related fields strongly suggests these factors play a critical, often underestimated role in engagement, motivation, and ultimately truly effective learning. They offer powerful, yet frequently overlooked levers for optimizing the learning experience, both within games and potentially beyond.
So for you, our listener, especially if you're an elementary educator newly interested in game-based learning, this deep dive hopefully offers a powerful new lens to look through. As you think about bringing games, whether they're sophisticated digital ones or even cleverly designed non-digital classroom activities that borrow game principles into your classroom, consider not just what the children are doing.
The surface activity.
Right, but how the design of that activity is making them feel. The emotional design, what they're hearing, if applicable, the musical score or soundscape, and how those actions, the mechanics, are specifically structured to support the learning, not distract from it. It's about being an intentional designer of the learning experience itself.
And this raises, I think, an important closing question for all of us to ponder. What subtle shifts in your own lesson design, whether it's game-based or not, informed by these elements of emotion, sound, and purposeful action, could potentially spark truly deeper engagement and more profound understanding for your young learners?
That's a great question to leave people with.
How can you consciously curate the experience of learning, the feel, the flow, the interaction, to be as effective and compelling as the content itself?
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We really hope this exploration has given you some surprising new insights and maybe some valuable tools or ideas for your educational toolkit.
Hope it was helpful.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring.